A man who spent 15 years learning how to disappear should have been impossible to find. But the night Nathan Archer saved a billionaire's life with a butter knife and a broken wine glass, he made the one mistake every ghost fears most. He let someone see him. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been with us before, you already know we don't do stories halfway. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one goes all the way to the end. The restaurant had a name that nobody really used. Locals called it the Italian Place on Delancey, which was technically accurate since it sat on Delancey Street in Lower Manhattan and served pasta, but the actual sign above the door read Carnevale, and the owner, a stubby Sicilian-American named Dom Ferrucci, had spent $11,000 on that sign and got genuinely upset whenever a reservation came in listed under the Italian Place. The hostess had learned to say Carnevale, good evening, in a tone that suggested the word itself was something you should feel honored to pronounce. Nathan Archer didn't care what the restaurant was called. He cared that the shift started at 5 and ended at close, that the hourly rate plus tips out covered daycare and groceries with about $40 left over if he was careful, and that his manager, a nervous man named Gerald who sweated through his shirts regardless of temperature, mostly left him alone as long as the tables got cleared fast and the dishes didn't break. He'd been working there 7 months. Before that, 4 months at a warehouse in Red Hook moving pallets of restaurant equipment. The kind of irony that would have been funny if he'd been in a mood to find things funny, which he mostly wasn't. Before the warehouse, 3 months of disability payments and a small apartment in Crown Heights where his daughter Lily slept in the bedroom and he slept on a pull-out couch, and pretended that was fine. Before all of that was a different life, lived by a version of himself he'd spent considerable energy trying to forget. The Friday night rush at Carnevale was in full swing by 7:30. The dining room was loud in the particular way that expensive restaurants get loud. Not the sharp chaos of a diner, but a layered, buzzing hum of voices and silverware and soft jazz from speakers recessed into the ceiling, all of it somehow adding up to an atmosphere that made people feel like they were somewhere worth being. Nathan moved through it the way he moved through everything, efficiently and without drawing attention. He was good at not drawing attention. He'd been trained for it once, though back then not drawing attention had meant something considerably more dangerous than clearing plates without making eye contact. "Table 12 needs a reset," said a voice beside him. Marta, one of the servers, not unkindly. She was one of the few people at Carnevale who seemed to actually see him rather than look through him. She was 26 and studying nursing and worked Friday and Saturday nights, and had once mentioned, offhandedly, that he reminded her of her uncle, which Nathan had chosen not to think too hard about. "On it," he said. Table 12 was in the back corner near the emergency exit, which Nathan had appreciated from his first shift in ways that were more instinctive than conscious. Clear sight lines to both the front entrance and the kitchen. 2 exits within reach. The kind of positioning that made tactical sense even in a civilian dining room, and that he sometimes hated himself for still noticing. He cleared the table in under 2 minutes. Breadcrumbs, wine residue, a lipstick-smudged napkin, a child's crayon drawing left behind on the paper tablecloth overlay, a purple dog with 6 legs, which Lily would have appreciated. He folded it and tucked it in his apron pocket without thinking, a reflex he didn't examine. The dining room was at capacity. 22 tables, all occupied. The bar had people 3 deep. Gerald was making the rounds with a forced smile that never quite reached his eyes, and the head chef was already screaming something in the kitchen about the expediter being an idiot, which happened every Friday and meant approximately nothing. This was the rhythm of the place. Nathan had learned it like a new language and found it, if not comfortable, then at least predictable. Predictable was what he needed. Lily was at his neighbor, Mrs. Okonkwo's apartment tonight. They had an arrangement. Nathan worked Friday evenings, Mrs. Okonkwo watched Lily, and Nathan helped with her grocery runs on Saturdays because she was 67 and her knees were bad. It wasn't exactly a social life, but it functioned, and function was the standard he held things to these days. Did it work? Did it hold together? Then it was good enough. Lily had drawn a picture for him before he left. She did this sometimes, taped it to the refrigerator or pressed it into his hand on his way out the door, like she was giving him something to carry. Tonight's was a drawing of what he thought might be a boat. though it had wheels and two figures standing on it that he was fairly certain were supposed to be him and her. One figure was much larger than the other. Both were smiling with the oversized half-moon smiles that 8-year-olds give everybody in drawings. The smiles that look nothing like how real people smile, but somehow feel more true. He kept that one in his shirt pocket. He didn't examine that reflex either. By 9 o'clock, the rush had peaked and begun to ebb, the way rushes always did. Tables turned over. People paid and left and were replaced by other people, and the whole machine kept churning, and Nathan kept moving through it. He'd developed a kind of meditative quality to the work, which he knew was a coping mechanism and didn't particularly care. The therapist he'd seen exactly 3 times after Sarah died had used the phrase compartmentalization as a survival strategy, and made it sound like a diagnosis. Nathan had not gone back for a 4th session. He was coming out of the kitchen with a bus tub when the woman walked in. He noticed her the way he noticed anyone who entered a space he occupied, reflexively, categorically, almost without meaning to. Female, early 30s, conservatively but expensively dressed in a dark blazer and slacks. Dark hair pulled back, moving with a kind of directional certainty that people with assistants usually had, used to rooms adjusting to them rather than adjusting to rooms. She was followed by 2 men in suits who were trying to look like dinner companions and failing because companions don't unconsciously scan a room's perimeter when they walk into it. Security. Private, not law enforcement. Nathan cataloged this the way you catalog whether it's raining. The hostess, Diane, approached with the practiced warmth of someone who'd been briefed. "Miss Sterling, your table is ready." So there was a reservation. Fine. Nathan went back to his work. He was aware of her the way he was aware of most things in his immediate environment. Not focused on her, just registered. She sat at table 4, which was in the front section, not his. Her security detail took a table nearby and ordered nothing, which meant they'd been told to stay sharp, which meant whoever this woman was, somebody had assessed her as a real enough target to put professionals on her. Nathan found himself mildly curious about that. He shut the curiosity down. The name filtered through to him gradually, the way names did in restaurants, through fragments of conversation, a server saying, "Ms. Sterling would like the linguine," and another saying, "Do you know who that is? That's Isabella Sterling, the battery woman. She's worth like," and the rest of the sentence dropping into the ambient noise. Sterling Energy. He'd heard the name. Clean energy something, a new kind of battery storage system that had been in the news more than once, usually in the context of very large numbers and geopolitical implications he hadn't paid much attention to. He didn't care about geopolitics anymore. That had been a different Nathan's problem. He finished resetting 3 tables and bussed 2 more, and was in the middle of a conversation with one of the line cooks about whether the Yankees had any shot this year. A conversation Nathan was participating in mostly by saying and maybe at intervals, when Gerald appeared at his elbow with the expression of a man who was about to ruin Nathan's evening. "Hey," Gerald said, "can you take the pickup outside? The delivery entrance is jammed. They need someone to go around front and—" "Sure," Nathan said, because arguing with Gerald was never worth the energy it cost. He took the 2 bags of trash from Gerald, shouldered through the kitchen's back exit, and came around the building's exterior toward the service bin on the Delancey side. The night was warm for October, that brief window before the city's cold sets in properly, and the street was busy the way lower Manhattan streets stay busy late on Fridays. Pedestrians, cabs, the distant sound of someone's music from a car window. He came around the corner and stopped. It happened very fast. There were 3 of them. 2 had Isabella Sterling's arms, 1 on each side, moving her toward a dark SUV that was idling at the curb with its rear door already open. She wasn't screaming. They'd done something to prevent that. A hand clamped over her mouth or some chemical, he couldn't tell from here. But she was fighting, her heels dragging against the pavement, and she wasn't going quietly. The 2 security detail men were on the ground. One was face down and still. The other was trying to get up and wasn't making it. The 3rd attacker stood near the vehicle, watching the street, a hand inside his jacket. Nathan stood still for approximately 1 second. Then he assessed. 3 hostile contacts, plus driver. 2 friendlies down. Civilian target in active transport. He was unarmed, in a busboy's uniform, carrying a bus tub with a ceramic bread plate, 2 glass tumblers, a butter dish, and a water carafe that was about 3/4 full. He dropped the bus tub, kept the carafe. He covered the distance to the watcher, the third man, the lookout, in 8 steps, fast and low, coming from an angle the man's peripheral vision wasn't covering because his peripheral vision was angled toward the street and not toward the building wall. Nathan brought the heavy glass carafe down across the back of the man's head in a short, controlled arc, the kind of strike designed to drop someone without killing them if you got the angle right. He got the angle right. The man folded. The 2 men holding Isabella heard it. They were professional enough that they didn't drop their cargo, Isabella. But one of them turned, releasing her right arm, which was the wrong choice. Isabella, who had apparently not been chemically subdued and was simply being physically overpowered by 2 men, immediately drove an elbow backward into the ribs of the man still holding her. She had no training that Nathan could detect, but she had rage and she used it effectively. The turning man came at Nathan fast. He was big, trained, and had the advantage of seeing Nathan coming now. He threw a punch that Nathan slipped inside of, the man's fist glancing off Nathan's shoulder instead of his jaw, and Nathan got 2 fingers into the pressure point above the man's collarbone, a technique that wasn't theatrical but was extremely effective, and the man went down to his knees making a sound like a man who has suddenly found breathing much harder than expected. The last one, the one Isabella had elbowed, shoved her sideways toward the SUV's open door and came for Nathan with something metal in his hand. Knife, Nathan thought, but the light was wrong, and it was actually a telescoping baton, which he extended with a snap of his wrist. Nathan didn't have time to think about it clearly. He stepped to the outside of the first swing, caught the man's baton arm at the wrist with both hands, turned his body into the man's center of gravity, and used the momentum to put the attacker hard into the side of the SUV. The impact made a sound like a bat hitting a car door. The man slid down the vehicle's side and didn't get up. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The SUV's driver was a factor. Nathan turned toward it, already calculating, but the driver apparently decided the math had changed and the vehicle pulled away from the curb with a screech that left skid marks on Delancey Street. Gone. Isabella Sterling was on the sidewalk, one hand pressed to the concrete, catching herself, staring at him. Her hair had come loose from where it was pinned. One sleeve of her blazer was torn at the shoulder. There was a red mark along her jaw from where someone's hand had pressed. She was breathing fast but controlled, the way someone does when they have decided they are not going to allow their body to fully process the terror until they find an appropriate moment, and she was staring at Nathan with an expression that contained several emotions simultaneously, which Nathan recognized as the experience of having just been through something that didn't have a name yet. He looked at her for a second. He looked at the 3 men on the ground, 2 unconscious, one on his knees still trying to breathe, and at the security guard who was finally getting to his feet, bleeding from somewhere above his ear. Nathan picked up the carafe, which had not broken. "You should call the police," he said. Then he went back around the corner of the building and through the service entrance and back into the kitchen and finished his shift. Gerald noticed he'd come back in without the trash and gave him a look, but said nothing, because Gerald chose his battles and had learned that Nathan was not a battle worth choosing. Marta noticed something was off about his face but didn't ask, because she was perceptive enough to know he wouldn't answer. The head chef continued being furious about the expediter. The machine kept running. Nathan cleared tables. He thought about Lily's drawing in his pocket, the boat with wheels. He thought about the woman on the sidewalk, the torn sleeve, the way she'd steadied herself. He thought about the fact that he'd reacted without deciding to react, the way water flows toward low ground without being asked to. 15 years of training and 3 years of trying to stop being that person, and all it took was 8 seconds, and it was right there, present and accessible and humiliatingly intact. He hadn't felt anything during it, not fear, not adrenaline, or rather, he'd felt both, but at a distance, muted, the way experienced swimmers feel cold water. Automatic. Clean. He hated that. He got off at 12:15. He walked the 11 blocks to Mrs. Okonkwo's building, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, knocked softly because it was late. Mrs. Okonkwo answered in her robe with a look that said, "You're later than usual," and Nathan apologized quietly and went into the living room where Lily was asleep on the sofa under a blanket, her mouth open, her right hand curled around the remote control of a television that had been off for probably 2 hours. He stood there looking at her for a minute. 8 years old. Brown hair from Sarah, the long eyelashes too. The particular way she frowned even while sleeping. She had his jaw, maybe, or at least his mother claimed she did, and she had an unsettling directness of expression when she chose to look at you that he couldn't identify the source of. She was smart in the particular way that sometimes worried him. Not academically, though she was that too, but perceptive, attuned, good at reading rooms in a way that kids her age usually weren't. He wondered sometimes if that was him, something she'd inherited or absorbed, this habit of paying attention to exits. He didn't want that for her. He wanted her to be the kind of person who walked into a restaurant and noticed the menu and the candles and the way the light looked, not the way the room could be controlled. He picked her up carefully. She stirred but didn't wake. And he thanked Mrs. Okonkwo and carried his daughter down the hall to their apartment and put her in bed and stood in the doorway of her room for longer than made sense. "Dad?" Lily's voice, half asleep. "Yeah." "Did you eat?" "I'll eat tomorrow." "That's what you always say." "Go back to sleep." A pause. Then, in the slow, diminishing register of someone dropping back toward unconsciousness. "The boat has wheels so we can go anywhere. Land or water." He stood there another moment. "Good thinking," he said. She was already asleep. The next morning he made her eggs and toast, and she ate them while doing a word puzzle that her teacher had sent home, a Friday thing, and he sat across from her with coffee and the slight, persistent ache in his shoulder from where the attacker's punch had landed. Not bad. He'd have a bruise by Monday, probably. He'd have bruises he didn't bother to explain. "Did something happen at work?" Lily asked, without looking up from her puzzle. "The kitchen was loud." "That's not what I mean." He looked at her. She was still looking at her puzzle, pencil moving. 8 years old, and already she knew the difference between the question he answered and the question she asked. "Everything's fine," he said. "You have that face." "What face?" "The one where you're not saying something." She looked up. Her expression was complicated for a kid, not accusatory, just watchful. "It's okay if something happened. You don't have to say what." Nathan put his coffee cup down. He thought about what to say. He thought about the sidewalk and the woman with the torn blazer sleeve and the 3 men he'd put down with a water carafe and his own hands and a technique he hadn't used outside of training in 8 years. "I helped someone," he said finally. "That's all." Lily appeared to consider this. She returned to her puzzle. "Good," she said. "That's what you do." He wasn't sure that was true. He wasn't sure what he did anymore exactly, in any meaningful sense. He made beds and cleared plates and packed lunches and signed permission slips and tried to be present in the particular effortful way of someone who has to remind themselves to be present. He paid his portion of the utilities on time and bought the good brand of orange juice because Lily preferred it, and the cheap brand wasn't that much cheaper anyway. He called his sister in Oregon every 2 or 3 weeks and kept those calls short because they always circled back to how he was really doing, and he never had a satisfying answer. He was surviving. That was what he did. The news was on the small kitchen television. He'd had it running in the background as background noise, which was a habit he'd gotten from his time overseas where silence felt dangerous. He wasn't watching it. Not really, but the word Sterling pulled his attention like a hook. The segment was brief. Isabella Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Energy, survived an attempted kidnapping last night in Lower Manhattan. 2 members of her private security detail were hospitalized. Police are investigating. Miss Sterling declined to comment. Sterling Energy stock opened this morning down 4%. The anchor moved on to the weather. Nathan picked his coffee cup back up. He'd known she'd be fine. He'd known that the moment he went back inside. She was upright, breathing, speaking. Call the police, he'd told her, and she'd had the presence of mind to register the instruction. But there was something strange about seeing it on television, seeing the thing he'd done translated into a 30-second news segment, the corporate name and the stock price and the absence of any mention of a busboy. Good. That was how it was supposed to go. No trace, no witness, no record. He thought about the looking, the way she'd looked at him from the pavement before she collected herself. She'd seen his face. That was a variable he hadn't controlled, because there hadn't been time to control it, and he told himself it didn't matter because she didn't know him and he didn't know her, and whatever she'd seen was going to fade the way faces faded when there was no context to anchor them. He told himself that. 3 days passed. On Tuesday, he picked Lily up from school and they walked to the park, and she told him about a fight between two kids in her class over a shared pencil case, which had apparently become a whole thing involving the teacher and a mediated conversation about ownership. And Nathan listened and made appropriate responses, and Lily said, "I think Riley was wrong, but Maya was also kind of mean about it," which seemed like a mature assessment, and Nathan said so, and Lily seemed pleased with that. They ate dinner and did homework, and she went to bed, and he sat at the kitchen table with his phone for a while, doing nothing productive. And then he looked at the ceiling and thought about the shoulder, still aching, right on schedule, and went to bed. Wednesday, he worked a double. His feet hurt by hour 9 and didn't stop hurting until hour 12, when everything below the knee sort of numbed out into a baseline complaint. Gerald told him he was doing a good job. Nathan said, "Thank you." He meant it in the literal sense. Gratitude for the paycheck, for the adequacy of his performance, for the fact that the system was functioning. Thursday afternoon, Lily came home from school quieter than usual. He noticed, but didn't push. He made spaghetti. The jarred sauce, she actually preferred it to homemade, which had initially offended him, but he'd made his peace with it. And she ate without much conversation, pushing the pasta around more than eating it. "Everything okay?" he asked. "There was a car today," she said. He went still, the kind of still that the body does when the mind is deciding something. "What kind of car?" "Gray. Parked on the corner when I came out. I thought I saw it yesterday, too." She paused. "I probably didn't." "Where exactly on the corner?" Lily looked at him. She'd heard the shift in his voice. "By the tree. The one with the painted trunk." She put her fork down. "Probably nothing." "Probably," Nathan said. He kept his voice completely level. He watched his daughter's face and made sure his own face said nothing. He was very good at this. Maybe too good. Maybe it was a problem in other contexts. And Lily went back to eating, and the evening progressed normally, and he washed dishes, and she watched a show, and he tucked her in and said goodnight, and waited until he heard her breathing slow, and then he sat at the kitchen table in the dark and felt something cold and familiar move through him like a current. He'd been found. He didn't know by who, not yet. He didn't know what they wanted, not exactly. But there was a gray car, and a child who'd seen it twice, and Nathan had spent enough years doing what he used to do to understand that surveillance on a child was not incidental. It was a message, or it was preparation, and neither of those things was acceptable. He sat there in the dark kitchen for a long time. Then he took out his phone and typed 3 words into the Notes app. Not a plan yet, just a fact he was acknowledging. "This isn't over." He stared at those words. Then he deleted them, because writing things down was a habit from before, and he didn't need habits from before. He knew what the words said. He didn't need to see them. He looked at the refrigerator where Lily had taped this week's drawings, the boat with wheels, a cat they didn't have, a figure that might have been Sarah, rendered in the particular way children render people they're trying to remember, approximate, effortful, caught between memory and imagination. He thought about what it meant to protect something. Not a strategic asset, not an operational objective. Just this. A child asleep down the hall who wanted orange juice and asked if he'd eaten and drew boats that could go anywhere. He thought about the woman on the sidewalk. He thought about how nothing in the last 3 days had been random. He put his phone down on the table, face up, and in the ambient light of the city coming through the kitchen window, he sat and waited and thought. Because the thinking had already started and there wasn't any stopping it now, and because whatever was coming was already on its way whether he prepared for it or not. He just hadn't decided yet if he was going to meet it standing up. But the deciding was happening somewhere below the level of words, the way decisions do when they're not really decisions at all, when they're just the moment you catch up to what you already know. The window was gray with October, and the street below was quiet, and Nathan Archer, who had spent 3 years becoming no one, sat in his kitchen at midnight and felt the shape of himself coming back like a bruise you press just to check if it still hurts. It did. He gave himself until morning to decide, and by morning he'd already decided. So the night was mostly just the process of catching up to it. He dropped Lily at school at 7:50 and stood at the corner long enough to watch who was watching. The gray car wasn't there. That didn't mean nobody was. It meant whoever it was had decided yesterday's pass was enough, or had moved to a less visible position, or was rotating vehicles. All three possibilities were worse than a stationary gray car on a corner because they implied resources, and resources implied organization, and organization implied this was not going to resolve itself if he kept his head down and waited. He walked back to the apartment. He made more coffee he didn't need. He sat at the kitchen table and opened his phone and looked at the news coverage from the previous 4 days and built a picture the way he used to build pictures. Laterally, connecting information that wasn't explicitly connected, reading what wasn't said as carefully as what was. Isabella Sterling had given a brief statement 48 hours after the incident. She thanked the authorities, expressed confidence in the ongoing investigation, declined to speculate about motive, and returned to work the following morning. She looked in the photographs like a person who had decided to perform competence and was mostly succeeding, which Nathan recognized as its own kind of discipline. She hadn't mentioned him. Of course she hadn't mentioned him. She'd barely seen him. It was dark and fast. She'd been in the middle of being abducted when he appeared, and she'd been on the ground when he walked away. But he thought about the way she'd looked at him. Direct, focused, the kind of looking that catalogs rather than just perceives. He thought she'd seen more than he'd wanted her to see. He was right. He found out at 2:15 in the afternoon when he was folding a load of laundry on the kitchen table and someone knocked on his apartment door. He went still. Mrs. Okonkwo knocked with a specific rhythm. 3 quick, 1 slow. A habit she'd developed, so he knew it was her. This was 2 medium knocks with a pause and then 1 more, which was not Mrs. Okonkwo. He set down the shirt he was folding. He looked at the door and at the window and at the distances involved. "Mr. Archer?" said a voice through the door. Male professional register, the clipped consonants of someone who'd been trained to speak clearly and quickly. "My name is Marcus Webb. I work for Isabella Sterling. She'd like to meet with you." Nathan didn't answer for a moment. "How did you find this address?" he said. A brief pause. "Ms. Sterling would prefer to explain that herself. She said to tell you she means no harm to you or your daughter." The mention of Lily made something tighten in Nathan's chest. Not fear exactly. Something more specific, more directed. The feeling of a man watching someone put a hand too close to something he can't allow them to touch. "Tell her I'm not interested," he said. "Mr. Archer, tell her I'm not interested, and tell her that if she found this address, other people can find this address. And if that's how this is going to go, this conversation is the last time anyone from her organization contacts me without a different kind of response." The silence on the other side of the door lasted about 4 seconds. "She said you'd say something like that," the man said. "She also said to tell you that the people who tried to take her already know your name. They had surveillance on Carnivale for 2 weeks before the incident. They photographed everyone who went in and out. You're in their system, Mr. Archer. Whether you meet with Miss Sterling or not doesn't change that." Nathan looked at the wall for a moment. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. He didn't open the door for 20 minutes. He used the time to check the building's other exits, confirm that the man in the hallway appeared to be alone, look out the kitchen window for vehicles he didn't recognize, and change out of his laundry day clothes into something that felt less like he was a person doing laundry on a Thursday afternoon and more like a person who had made a deliberate choice about this meeting. It was a small thing, the clothes. He knew that. But small things matter when you're trying to remember who you are. Marcus Webb was about 40, compact, the kind of build that suggested he'd maintained a physical regimen for a long time without being theatrical about it. He had a face that was professionally neutral and eyes that were professionally alert, and he shook Nathan's hand with the grip of a man who had been trained not to overdo the handshake and had internalized it perfectly. Former military, probably. Private sector transition, probably 10 years ago based on the slight softness around the jaw. The desk work eventually produces even in people who fight it. "She's downstairs," Webb said. "She came herself?" "She insisted." Nathan thought about that. A billionaire who'd been attacked 4 days ago coming personally to a busboy's apartment building in Crown Heights at 2 in the afternoon, instead of sending a representative or a lawyer or a formal request through an intermediary. Either she was reckless, which was possible, or she was making a deliberate statement about how seriously she was taking this, which was also possible, and he wasn't sure which one he preferred. He followed Webb down the stairs. Isabella Sterling was standing on the sidewalk outside the building's entrance, which surprised him. He'd assumed a car with tinted windows, maybe a lobby if she could get in one. Instead, she was just standing there in a dark coat with her hands in her pockets, looking at the street. Her hair was down today, and without the professional architecture of the dinner blazer, she looked slightly younger and also slightly harder, like a version of herself that didn't feel the need to assemble itself quite so carefully. She saw him come through the door, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, sharpened by 3 days of whatever she'd done with the memory of his face. "You really did just walk back inside," she said. "The shift wasn't over." She almost laughed. It didn't fully form, but the shape of it was there. "I spent 4 days trying to find you. I thought I'd imagined you. My security detail saw your back. The restaurant camera on that side of the building was positioned wrong, nothing usable. But there's a bodega camera half a block down." She paused. Partial face. "Enough. You have a background that's mostly classified, but the parts that aren't are very convincing." Nathan watched her. "What do you want, Ms. Sterling?" "I want to know if you'd like to know who sent those men." "I know who sent those men." She looked at him. "You don't. Someone who wants your technology bad enough to take you alive instead of just eliminating the problem, which means they need you operational, at least initially. Access codes, development files, something they can't get without you. Competitor, probably with state backing based on the operational sophistication." 3 men in a coordinated street grab with transport already in position isn't someone's corporate security team. A beat of silence. "You worked that out from 8 seconds on a sidewalk," Isabella said. "I had time to think on my shift." She looked at him differently now, not with the gratitude expression, which he'd been braced for, but with something more assessing. "Come have coffee with me," she said. 30 minutes. After that, if you want to walk away, I won't stop you and I won't contact you again." He thought about the gray car. He thought about Lily saying, "I probably didn't," with the particular careful diplomacy of a child who has learned that her father doesn't like to be worried. 30 minutes, he said. Mom. They went to a coffee shop 2 blocks over, a small place that wasn't fashionable enough to attract much of a crowd on a weekday afternoon. Webb and another member of Isabella's detail took a table by the door. Nathan and Isabella took a corner table. Her choice, he noted. And she'd chosen the corner with the sight lines, which meant someone had coached her well after the incident. She ordered black coffee and didn't touch it for the first several minutes. "My father founded Sterling Research about 30 years ago," she said. "Small operation. Defense contract work, but just material sciences, energy storage for military applications. When he died, I took it over and pivoted it. I wasn't interested in weapons systems." She said this flatly without editorializing. "I was interested in clean power storage, which turned out to be the more commercially interesting problem anyway. The new battery architecture we developed, I won't get technical, but the short version is it solves the storage problem that's blocked renewable energy scaling for 40 years. Charge density 4 times current lithium-ion, discharge stability across temperature ranges that make current systems look like toys, and a manufacturing cost curve that makes it viable at scale within 3 years." Nathan listened. He wasn't an engineer, but he understood enough to follow the implications. "And militarily?" She looked at him steadily. "Militarily, the same properties that make it revolutionary for civilian power grids make it extremely attractive for portable high-energy systems, the kind of systems that require very large amounts of power stored in a very small space." She paused. "We've had defense inquiries. We've declined all of them. The technology is not being developed for weapons applications. That's a choice I made and I've held to it." "Someone disagrees with that choice." "Several someones." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "After the incident, my head of security pulled surveillance records going back 60 days. The team that took me, they weren't improvising. They'd mapped my movement patterns, my security rotation, the restaurant staff schedule. They knew which direction my car was parked. They knew the security detail numbers." Her jaw tightened slightly. "They had inside information. Somebody in my organization gave them operational details." "You have a leak." "I have a leak. Or had. We've locked the operational details down now, but the damage was already done in terms of what they know about me and about the technology." She looked at him directly. "The same surveillance operation that mapped me also photographed everyone associated with the restaurant. You, specifically, were flagged after the incident. I don't know how quickly they identified you. They identified me within 48 hours, Nathan said. Her expression changed. How do you know that? My daughter noticed a surveillance vehicle near her school Tuesday afternoon, possibly Monday as well. The pause that followed was short but heavy. They went after your daughter, Isabella said, and her voice had a different quality now. Not softer, but more careful. The way someone gets when they understand they've caused a harm they didn't intend. They went near her, Nathan said. There's a difference so far. I'm sorry. Nathan. She used his first name for the first time. I'm genuinely sorry. You saved my life and they're using that to get to you. He looked at her for a moment. He wasn't in the habit of accepting apologies. Not because he was cold about it, but because apologies in his experience didn't change the tactical situation. And the tactical situation was the thing that needed changing. Tell me about the organization. What do you know? She told him what she knew, which was more than he'd expected and organized well. She thought clearly, laid out information in sequence, flagged what was confirmed versus inferred. The group was not a single corporate competitor. It was a network, better word, she said, than organization, that had appeared in fragments across 3 different intelligence contexts in the past 18 months. Former military contractors, some Eastern European, some domestic. Financial backing that traced, in the 2 cases where anyone had successfully traced it, back to shell structures and jurisdictions that didn't cooperate with U.S. legal processes. They had tried to buy access to Sterling's technology through intermediaries 6 months ago. Isabella had declined. They had tried to place a consultant, a seemingly legitimate defense analyst, into her research operation 4 months ago. Her head of security had flagged him, and he'd been quietly removed. They had tried the kidnapping 3 weeks after that. They're escalating, Nathan said. Each step was more direct. Yes. And the inside leak. Do you have candidates? I have 3 people who had access to the operational scheduling data. I don't know which one. She paused. I'm not sure I can find out with the resources I have. My security team is good, but this is a different kind of problem. Nathan drank his coffee. It was decent. The afternoon light came through the front windows at a low angle and lit the side of Isabella's face, and he noticed she had the kind of tiredness that wasn't just from the incident. It was older than that, layered in, the tiredness of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time before the kidnapping and was now carrying more. You came here to ask me for help, he said. I came here to tell you that you're already in this whether you want to be, and to ask whether you'd prefer to be in it with information and resources or in it alone. She met his eyes. I'm not trying to manipulate you. You have a daughter. You have a right to know what's coming at you. He put his cup down. What are you actually asking? I'm asking if you'll help me find the leak and help me figure out what they're actually planning, because I don't think the kidnapping was the end goal. I think it was one step in something larger. She stopped. I'm asking for your help, Nathan. I'm not asking you to go back to whatever you were. I'm asking for someone who can look at what I'm looking at and understand it in a way that I can't. He sat with that for a moment. Outside on the sidewalk, a kid on a bicycle went past the window, wobbly and determined, refusing to fall. I need something from you first, he said. Name it. My daughter needs to be somewhere they can't reach her, somewhere clean, no connection to me, people I trust, while this is happening. He looked at her. Can you make that happen quietly, without creating a paper trail that leads back to her location? Isabella didn't hesitate. Yes. Not your security team. They might be compromised. I have people outside the company. I'll use them. He nodded slowly. The deciding was already done, had been done since the kitchen table at midnight. He was just working through the operational sequencing now. I'll help you find the leak. After that, we reassess. Fair enough? He picked up his coffee cup. And Ms. Sterling, Isabella. The 30 minutes was up 10 minutes ago. This time she did laugh, briefly, a real one, the kind that appears without announcement. It made her look different, briefly, like a person rather than a corporate narrative. Then it faded and she was back to what she was, which was a 30-year-old woman with a revolutionary technology and a serious problem and the composure to hold it all together in a coffee shop in Crown Heights at 3 in the afternoon. I know, she said. You stayed anyway. He didn't answer that, but he didn't deny it either. That he picked Lily up from school himself that day instead of the after-school program. She came out with her backpack and her coat unbuttoned despite the weather, which was a daily battle he'd mostly given up on, and she spotted him and her face did the thing it did. A brightening, uncomplicated, the kind of expression that no adult ever quite managed to produce because adults learn to moderate their visible happiness as a form of self-protection. Lily hadn't learned that yet. He hoped she wouldn't. He hoped she'd find some middle ground between his way and her current way, something that let her feel things fully without it being a liability. He wasn't sure how to help her get there. He wasn't sure he knew the route. "Why are you here?" she said, not ungratefully, just surprised. "I had the afternoon off." "You never have the afternoon off." "Today I do." He took her backpack. "How was school?" "We had a substitute in math who didn't know how to do fractions right, and I told him he was wrong, and he got kind of mad about it." "Were you right?" "Obviously." "Then you handled it fine," Nathan said, and she seemed satisfied with this judgment. They stopped for ice cream, which was something they almost never did on weekdays, and Lily took this as evidence that something was either very wrong or very good, and spent most of the walk home trying to figure out which, asking lateral questions in the way she'd developed of approaching things she sensed he didn't want to answer directly. "Are we going somewhere?" she asked. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you got ice cream on a Thursday, and you've been looking at stuff. Like, at things other than me. Like you're thinking." He looked down at her. "I'm always thinking." "Different thinking." She licked her ice cream. "Like when we went to Grandma's that summer, before." She didn't elaborate. Before covered a lot of ground in their household. Before meant before Sarah got sick, before they moved, before the world rearranged itself into its current shape. He'd taken her to his mother's in Oregon for 3 months that summer, after the first diagnosis and before they knew how bad it was going to get. He'd needed somewhere to put her that was safe while he helped Sarah with the appointments, the early rounds of treatment, the long days at the hospital. Lily had been 5 then. She remembered more of it than he sometimes expected. "You might stay with some people I know for a little while," he said carefully. "People who will take good care of you." Lily ate her ice cream. She thought about this with the serious thoroughness she brought to anything she was uncertain about. "Are you going to be okay?" "I'm going to be fine." "That's not the same as okay." He looked at her. 8 years old. God, the sharpness of her. He felt something in his chest that he didn't have a clean word for. Pride and grief and something protective that had no edge to it, no limit. "I'm going to be careful," he said. "I promise you that." She appeared to decide this was acceptable. They walked the rest of the way home in relative quiet, and she held his hand without being asked to, and he let her, and that was enough for the moment. Nathan spent that evening making calls he hadn't made in 3 years. Not his old unit. That was a door he had reasons to keep closed, reasons that lived in a particular set of memories he'd wrapped in something like silence and tried not to disturb. But there were people adjacent to that world who operated in the private sector now, people who owed him nothing and whom he owed nothing, but with whom there was a shorthand, a shared context, a way of communicating efficiently without the explaining that civilian relationships required. One of those people was a woman named Claire Souza, who had been a defense intelligence analyst and was now technically a private security consultant and actually something less clearly defined that operated in the space between corporate intelligence and things governments preferred not to officially acknowledge. She was in her mid-40s, lived in D.C., and had a way of answering her phone that suggested she'd seen the number coming before it rang. "Nathan Archer," she said. "I was wondering when." "When what?" "When you were going to come back." She said it without judgment, just noting a fact. "The Sterling thing is yours." He paused. "How do you know about the Sterling thing?" "Because I've been watching the network behind it for 8 months. Different thread than yours, but we've ended up in the same room." A pause on her end. "You took down 3 of their people with restaurant equipment. Carafe and pressure points. They're calling you the ghost of Platform 9 on their internal comms, which is partly your address history and partly someone's sense of humor." He filed that away. "What do you know about them?" She told him carefully, the way intelligence people told you things, giving you what you needed while withholding what she needed you not to have yet. The network had a name, or at least a designation used internally, Vantage, former military, primarily U.S., and NATO adjacent, turned mercenary over roughly a decade. Leadership was insulated behind several corporate structures. The operational goal, as best as anyone had assessed, was control of Isabella Sterling's battery technology, specifically the ability to weaponize it. They don't want to sell it, Claire said. They want to use it. There's a particular application we've been tracking: electromagnetic pulse systems, high-density mobile platforms, the kind that could take down a city's infrastructure in about 20 minutes from the back of a truck. Nathan sat with that. And they need Sterling alive for the technical access. For now. Once they have what they need from her, her usefulness ends. Claire's voice was flat about this, not cruel, just accurate. She has about a 30-day window, our assessment, before they shift strategy. I need to know if there's a flag on her company, surveillance, asset tracking. There's a flag on everything, Nathan. That's the world. A pause. But yes, specifically, 3 names came up in our analysis as potential inside sources. I'll send you what I can. Secure channel. Obviously. She paused. Nathan, you know I'm going to say this. You've been out for 3 years. You've been living as a civilian. This isn't the same world as what you left. I know, but you're still going to do it. My daughter had a car outside her school, he said. A long pause. I'll send you the file, Claire said and hung up. He sat at the kitchen table. From Lily's room, he could hear the small sounds of her getting ready for bed. The water running, the particular thump of her backpack against the wall that she did every night, the creak of the floorboard near her window. He listened to all of it and thought about 30 days and underground networks and a woman in a coffee shop who'd asked for help with her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. The file from Claire arrived in under an hour. 3 names, brief summaries, connection maps. He read through it twice, carefully. The second name on the list was a Sterling Energy executive named David Falk, head of operations. The file noted that Falk had a brother-in-law with documented ties to 2 of the shell companies in the Vantage financial structure, and that Falk had accessed Isabella's security scheduling system 3 days before the kidnapping attempt at an hour and from a location that didn't match his normal pattern. That wasn't proof. It was a thread. But Nathan had spent years pulling threads. He closed the file and looked at the wall and thought about the next move, the one after that, the sequence of things that needed to happen before any of this resolved. He thought about Lily's face when he told her she was going somewhere safe for a while. The flicker of something she'd managed to keep out of her voice, held in, stored for later, the quiet bravery of a child who'd already survived more disruption than any 8-year-old should have to, and had developed somewhere in that process the capacity to absorb more without breaking. He hated that she'd had to develop that capacity. He hated that he was the one who'd made it necessary, first by who he'd been, and now by what he'd done on a sidewalk with a water carafe. But there wasn't a version of that night where he'd walked away. He knew that with the same bone-level certainty that he knew left from right. Some things you didn't choose, you just did them, and then you lived with the shape of them afterward. He got up, rinsed his coffee cup, and went to check that the apartment door was properly locked and the window latches set and the chain on, all things he'd checked an hour ago. Then he stood in the hallway outside Lily's room and listened until her breathing slowed and the small sounds stopped. Tomorrow, he was going to call Isabella and tell her about David Falk. Tonight, he stood in the hallway of his apartment in Crown Heights, listening to his daughter sleep, and let himself exist in the quiet for a few more minutes before the quiet ended. He had a feeling it was going to be a while before he got it back. The call to Isabella lasted 40 minutes, and for the first 10 of them, she didn't say anything about David Falk at all. She asked about Lily, not in the performative way of someone who feels obligated to acknowledge a person's child, but with the focused attention of someone who understood that the child was the center of the situation and everything else was peripheral to it. Nathan answered her questions briefly and honestly, and she told him she had an arrangement in place. A secure location in Connecticut, a family who'd worked with her father's organization for years, completely off the grid of anything connected to Sterling Energy. I need to meet them first, Nathan said. I expected that. I can have them in the city by tomorrow afternoon. He told her about Falk then. He laid it out the same way Claire had laid it out to him. Threads, not proof, connection maps, anomalous access timing. Isabella listened without interrupting, which he appreciated because people who interrupted during briefings usually did it to process out loud, which slowed everything down and scattered the structure. When he finished, there was a pause. David's been with the company 6 years, she said, not defending him exactly, more like she was placing the information against something she already knew and watching the shape it made. That's enough time to be turned. He was loyal to my father first, before me. Another pause. He's the one who pushed hardest for us to consider defense contracts. When was that? About a year ago, I said no. He accepted it. A beat. Or I thought he did. People who accept things they don't actually accept are usually waiting for a different angle, Nathan said. The defense contract angle didn't work, so someone found another one. His brother-in-law, Isabella said, and Nathan could hear her fitting pieces together in real time. Paul. I've met Paul twice, holiday dinners. He was quiet, forgettable. I didn't see it. You weren't looking for it. I should have been. No, Nathan said, and he meant it. That's not how you build a company. You can't run an organization while assuming everyone around you is compromised. That's how you end up with nothing. She was quiet for a moment. So what do we do with Falk? We don't touch him yet. If he knows he's been identified, he goes dark and we lose the connection to Vantage. Right now he's a thread. We need him to keep pulling on it from their end while we pull from ours. You want to use him. I want to know who he's reporting to and how. Nathan paused. Can you get me inside the building? Not officially. No paperwork, no badge that goes in a log. I can have Webb arrange it. When? Tonight, if possible. Late? After 9 when the floors thin out. I need access to Falk's workstation and his calendar for the last 60 days. A long pause. He could hear her breathing, the quality of it. Not frightened, more like someone standing at the edge of something and measuring the distance. I'll call Webb, she said. Sterling Energy occupied the top 4 floors of a glass and steel building in Midtown. The kind of building that was impressive in the way that buildings in Midtown were impressive. Functionally, economically, without much feeling. Nathan arrived at 9:40 in dark clothes and a jacket that wasn't the Carnivale uniform, and Webb met him at a side entrance with a temporary access card that was keyed to the stairwells and the research floors and had no name attached to it. Ms. Sterling is upstairs, Webb said. She doesn't need to be here for this. She wants to be. He said it with the neutrality of someone who had learned not to argue with his employer on certain categories of decision. The research floor was largely empty. 2 engineers were still at their stations at the far end of the space, headphones on, not looking up. The overhead lights had shifted to evening mode, lower, warmer, the kind of light that officially implied you should go home, but in practice just meant the people still here cared more than average. Isabella was in a glass-walled conference room adjacent to the main floor. She'd changed since the afternoon. Jeans now, a plain dark shirt, her hair loose. She looked less like a CEO and more like a person, and Nathan couldn't tell if that was deliberate or if this was just what the end of a hard day looked like on her. I pulled his calendar myself, she said when Nathan came in. She had a laptop open. I didn't want anyone else touching it. Nathan sat across from her and looked at the screen. He spent 20 minutes with the calendar and Falk's access logs while Isabella sat quietly and let him work, and in that 20 minutes he found 3 things that mattered. An off-site meeting logged as a vendor lunch with a company name that didn't appear anywhere in Sterling's vendor database. A second access to the scheduling system, earlier than the one Claire had flagged, at 4 in the morning from a VPN that routed through a server in Warsaw, and a blocked 40-minute window the previous Friday. Recurrent weekly, no label, no attendees listed. What's today? Nathan asked. Friday? Isabella said. It's Friday. He looked at the clock on the laptop, 10:12. The window is at 11, he said. Tonight. She understood immediately. He's still in the building. I saw him on the floor when I came up. He stays late on Fridays sometimes. I never... She stopped. He's making a report. Probably. We need to know how... Phone, laptop, an external device he brings in. Nathan, if we go out there now, he'll see us. Not us, Nathan said. Just me. Tell me where his office is and stay here. She gave him the layout quickly. Northeast corner, private office, glass walls but with privacy film on the lower half, so you could see heads above it, but not what was on the desk. He left the conference room and crossed the main floor, staying along the perimeter, moving in the way he'd learned to move in environments where being seen was the variable you controlled. The two engineers didn't look up. The floor was large enough that the northeast corner was in its own pocket of quiet, separated from the open workspace by a short corridor and two closed doors. He found a position outside Falk's office door in the corridor, close enough to hear without being visible through the glass. 12 minutes passed. He counted them without a watch, the old way, by breath and internal rhythm. Then he heard Falk's voice, low, controlled, the voice of a man who was accustomed to having conversations he didn't want anyone to hear. Nathan couldn't catch every word from the corridor. The door was solid, and the building's HVAC system created enough ambient noise to muddy it, but he caught fragments. Enough. Not going to hold. And she's brought someone in. I don't know who. And yes, the Archer name came back clean. Former SEAL. He's working with her now. And then a pause. And then, more quietly, I understand. I'll get the technical files before... And then the call ended, and there was silence. Nathan had heard enough. He went back to the conference room. Isabella looked at his face when he came in and didn't ask how it went. She could read it. He's reporting to someone inside Vantage, Nathan said. He knows my name. He knows I'm working with you, or suspects it. He said he'd get the technical files, which means they're moving up their timeline. They know their inside position is getting less secure. Isabella closed the laptop carefully. Her hands were steady, but she was pressing her fingers into the edge of the machine harder than necessary. The technical files are the core architecture, the charge density formulas, the manufacturing process, the discharge stability data. If they get that, they can build it without you. Yes. She looked up at him. Which means after that, I'm not useful anymore. Right. She absorbed this without visible panic, which Nathan was starting to understand was characteristic of her. Not that she didn't feel things, but that she processed them through action rather than expression, channeling whatever she felt into the next problem. He could respect that. It was a different mechanism than his own, but he recognized the underlying architecture. We need to pull the files offline tonight, she said. Physical air gap on the core architecture. Can you do that without alerting Falk? Yes. I have root access he doesn't know about. My father built a failsafe into the system, a secondary admin layer with a different entry point. David never knew it existed. She was already opening the laptop again. Give me 40 minutes. I'll be in the corridor, but she did it in 35. Nathan spent those 35 minutes in the corridor and in his own head, running sequences. Claire's 30-day window had just compressed. If Falk was reporting that his position was becoming compromised, Vantage would accelerate. That meant they'd move on the technical files within days, either through Falk or through some more direct method if Falk couldn't deliver. He called Claire from the corridor, keeping his voice below the ambient hum. They're moving up, he said. I know, she said, which meant she'd been monitoring the same threads. We had a flag on a Vantage communication node 20 minutes ago. They're activating 2 additional teams, one for the technology extraction, one for... She paused. One for removal. Removal meaning Isabella. And potentially you. You're in their system now, Nathan. They flagged you as a priority secondary target after you took down the Delancey Street team. A pause. There's something else. We pulled a communication from 3 days ago. They found your daughter's school. The hallway was very quiet. Nathan stood in it and let the information land without reacting to it outwardly, which was something he'd trained himself to do in situations where reacting outwardly was a liability. Inwardly was a different matter. How specific, he said, and his voice was flat and neutral in the way that voices get when the alternative is not neutral at all. Specific enough, they have the school name and the after-school program schedule. A pause. Nathan, she needs to move tonight. I know. He breathed in, out. I know. I'll make it happen. He ended the call and stood in the corridor for a moment with his phone in his hand. He thought about Lily in her room, asleep, the particular way her mouth stayed slightly open and her right hand curled even when there was nothing to hold on to. He thought about the boat with wheels that could go anywhere, land or water. He thought about the fact that she was 8 years old and had survived more disruption than any child should have to. And here he was, asking her to survive more. He called Mrs. Okongwo first. He kept it brief and said it was an emergency, and she needed to take Lily somewhere for a few days. And Mrs. Okonkwo, who was 67 and had lived through enough of her own life to know that emergencies at midnight were real ones, said, "Tell me where and I'll go now." And Nathan told her, and she said she'd be ready in 20 minutes. He was back in the conference room when Isabella finished. She looked up from the laptop with the expression of someone who had just done something that couldn't be undone. "It's done," she said. "The core architecture is offline and on 2 physical drives. One with me, one in a location only I know." "We need to move Lily tonight," Nathan said. She didn't pause. She picked up her phone and made a call and spoke to someone for 3 minutes in a low, efficient voice. And when she ended the call, she said, "The family in Connecticut. They'll be ready in 2 hours. I'll send a car that isn't in any of our company records. Clean plates? Clean everything." He looked at her. She was leaning against the conference table with her arms crossed, and she looked tired in a way that went past tonight, the kind of tired that came from running hard for a long time without letting yourself stop. He didn't know much about her life outside of what the news covered. The company, the technology, the public version of Isabella Sterling that was all forward momentum and clean innovation narratives. But there was a person in this room, distinct from that version, and the person looked like she was finding out how much weight she could carry before her knees gave. "You should go home too," he said. "Somewhere they don't have mapped. I have an apartment they don't know about, one I've never used professionally. It's under a different name, a family holding. My head of security set it up 2 years ago as a protocol option." A pause. "I never thought I'd actually need it. Use it tonight." "I will." She pushed off the table. "Nathan, I need to tell you something about my father." He waited. "The Vantage Network. Their leadership, the documents Claire sent you, the financial traces. Some of those structures go back 15 years. My father was involved with some of the people in Vantage. Not the network itself, it didn't exist then in this form. But the people. The original investors in Sterling Research. Some of the early defense work we did." She was choosing her words with visible care. "I found documents last month that suggest my father knew what some of those people were planning. Not all of it, but enough." Nathan was still. "You think your father built something that Vantage is trying to complete," he said. "I think my father built the early architecture, the battery research, the theoretical framework, with funding from people who had specific applications in mind. Applications he may not have fully understood at first, and then understood too well." She met Nathan's eyes. "He died of a stroke 3 years ago, the official cause. But the timeline of his health deterioration and a series of communications I found suggest someone inside Vantage put pressure on him in the last 18 months of his life. Heavy pressure." "You think they killed him?" She didn't answer that directly. "I think he was afraid of them, and I think he pivoted the company, took it away from defense, took it into clean energy, not just because of the market opportunity. I think he was trying to put the technology somewhere they couldn't use it. And now they want it back. And now they want it back." She said it quietly, like something settled. Nathan thought about this, about the shape of a conspiracy that was 15 years old at its base, about a dead man who'd tried to outmaneuver people he'd originally worked with, about a daughter who'd built her life on what her father left behind without fully understanding what he'd built it on. "The documents you found," he said. "Where are they?" "Copies are with an attorney. Originals are in my apartment safe." She paused. "The attorney is Thomas Hale. He's been my family's lawyer for 20 years. He's the one person outside the company I'd trust completely." "Have you talked to Hale about Vantage specifically?" "I called him yesterday." A pause. "He was unavailable. His assistant said he was traveling. He's never unavailable, Nathan. In 20 years. He felt the familiar cold current move through him. "When did you call him?" "Yesterday afternoon, around 2. He thought about the timing. "That was around the time Falk made his report. If Hale is compromised, he's not compromised," she said, and the certainty in it was of the personal kind, the kind that lives in the body rather than the head. "He's not compromised, but he might be in danger. If Vantage found out I was talking to him about the documents, can you reach him right now? Any number, any method?" She tried. She tried 3 numbers while Nathan watched, and on the third one, a personal cell that went directly to voicemail, Her expression hardened in the way that things do when a fear becomes a fact. "We need to find him," she said. "We need to find him and secure those original documents," Nathan said. "If Vantage gets the originals, they eliminate the evidence trail and they eliminate Hale as a risk." Which means he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Isabella was already reaching for her coat. "His home address. I know where he lives." "Not tonight. It's not safe to move on that tonight without knowing where Vantage's teams are positioned. If they're already there," he held her gaze. "We go in the dark, we don't know what we're walking into, and we can't help Hale if we walk into something we can't get out of." She stopped. He could see the cost of stopping visible on her face. The instinct to move against the calculation that said moving wrong was worse than not moving at all. He understood that specific frustration intimately. "I need Claire's people to locate Vantage's active teams first," he said. "Give me until morning. If Claire can tell us where they are, we move on Hale's location with that information. If she can't, we reassess." Isabella put her hands flat on the conference table. "Thomas Hale has been part of my life since I was 4 years old," she said. "He was at my father's funeral. He was at mine when—" She stopped. "He was there for things. Important things." "I know," Nathan said. "And that's exactly why we do this right instead of fast." She breathed in, out. She nodded once, the nod of someone making a decision they're not entirely at peace with. "Fine. Until morning. But Nathan," she looked at him directly, "if he's hurt because I waited, I'm going to carry that." "I know," he said. "That's how it works." He said it without softening it because he knew better than to soften things that were true. She seemed to understand that, at least, seemed to register that he wasn't being cold but was being honest, and that there was a distinction, and that the distinction mattered. They left the building separately. Nathan went first, checking the street from the lobby before giving Webb the all-clear for Isabella to follow through the side entrance to a car that wasn't logged. On the cab ride to Crown Heights, Nathan called Mrs. Okonkwo to confirm the logistics, and she told him she and Lily were ready, and Lily was awake and had asked where they were going and had been told it was an adventure, and had apparently accepted this with equanimity. He told Mrs. Okonkwo the address and told her to take a cab directly there and not to stop. "Is my daughter going to be okay?" Mrs. Okonkwo asked, and for a moment Nathan thought she meant Lily, and then he understood she meant him. "I'm working on it," he said. He got back to the apartment at 11:40. Lily was sitting on her bed with her coat on and her backpack packed, which meant she'd been ready for longer than she'd been told she needed to be. She looked at him when he came in with that direct, measured expression that still sometimes caught him off guard. "I'm not scared," she said, which meant she was. "I know," he said. He sat down on the edge of the bed next to her. "I'm going to sort some things out. It won't be long." "You don't know that." "No," he said. "I don't. But I'm going to do everything I can to make it true." He looked at her. "I need you to be somewhere safe while I do it. Mrs. Okonkwo is going with you. You'll be okay." Lily looked at her backpack. "I packed my drawings," she said. "The important ones." "Good thinking. And your old watch, from the box." She looked up at him. "I hope that's okay. I didn't ask." He had a watch in a box at the back of his closet that he'd taken off 3 years ago and not put back on. Navy issue, scratched, one of the links on the band replaced with a slightly wrong size that he'd never fixed. He didn't know what had made Lily take it, whether it was superstition or instinct, or just the impulse to carry something of his with her. He thought about telling her she didn't need it. "It's okay," he said. She put her head briefly against his shoulder, just for a moment, the duration of a breath, and then she straightened up and picked up her backpack and said, "Okay," in the tone of someone who had decided. He walked her downstairs to the cab where Mrs. Okonkwo was already waiting, gave Mrs. Okonkwo a piece of paper with the Connecticut address and a phone number that would reach Webb, said thank you in a way that didn't cover what he meant but was all he had, and watched the cab pull away from the curb and move down the block and turn the corner and disappear. He stood on the sidewalk. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, someone's window was still lit up, the blue flicker of a television. He thought about Thomas Hale and the original documents and what they might contain. He thought about Isabella's father, a man he'd never met, who had apparently spent the last years of his life trying to put something dangerous somewhere it couldn't be used, and had failed, and had left his daughter holding it. He thought about the Vantage teams that Claire had flagged, active and moving, timeline compressed. He thought about what 30 days meant now that 30 days had become something closer to 72 hours. He went back inside. He had work to do, and the night was getting shorter. He sat at the kitchen table where Lily had eaten dinner 3 hours ago, where her word puzzle from school was still sitting with 3 answers left blank, and he opened his phone and called Claire and said, "I need everything you have on Vantage's current team positions, and I need it before 6 in the morning." And Claire said she'd see what she could do. He stayed at the table and worked, and the apartment was very quiet around him, and the quiet had a different quality than it usually did. Thinner, more present, the kind of quiet that happens when the thing that normally fills a space is no longer in it. He worked through it. He didn't let himself stop. Claire's information arrived at 5:47 in the morning in a file that was encrypted twice and had a self-delete trigger set at 8 hours. Nathan had been awake for all of the hours between and felt it in the particular way of someone who'd pushed past tired into the functional zone on the other side. Not alert exactly, but operational, the mind running on a narrower track that cut out everything that wasn't immediately necessary. He read through the file carefully, twice, the way he'd been trained to read intelligence. First pass for the shape of it, second pass for the details that the shape made you miss. Claire had given him what she had and flagged what she wasn't certain about, which he appreciated, because intelligence people who flagged uncertainty were more useful than intelligence people who didn't. The ones who didn't flag it were the ones who got people killed. Vantage had 3 active teams in the New York area. One was a surveillance unit, 2 people, rotating vehicles, focused on Sterling Energy's building and Isabella's known residential address. One was an extraction team, 4 people staged in a hotel in Midtown, equipment consistent with a technical operation rather than a combat one, which meant they were planning to move on the technology files rather than on Isabella directly at this stage. The third team was smaller, 2 people, and was positioned near a residential address in the West Village. Thomas Hale's address. Nathan was in a cab heading toward the West Village at 6:15, calling Isabella from the back seat with the phone held low and his voice quiet. "They're at Hale's building," he said. A short silence. Then, "Is he? I don't know yet. I'm 20 minutes out." He paused. "Stay where you are. Don't move until I contact you." "Nathan, I know," he said. "Stay put." She did, which he suspected cost her considerably. Thomas Hale lived in a brownstone on a tree-lined block in the West Village that had the settled, particular quiet of a street where people had lived for a long time and intended to keep doing so. Nathan arrived on foot, having paid the cab off 2 blocks over, and walked the street once from the opposite sidewalk before committing to anything. The Vantage surveillance team was not subtle, which told him either they didn't expect anyone to be looking for them at 6:30 in the morning, or they didn't care. A dark sedan was parked across from the brownstone with 2 occupants who weren't doing anything convincingly enough to pass as people who had a legitimate reason to be parked on a residential block before dawn. One was watching the building's front entrance. The other was on a phone. Nathan went around the block. There was an alley running behind the brownstones, service access, the kind that had been there since the buildings were built and was now mainly used for trash pickup and the occasional delivery. He moved through it without hurrying. The back gate of Hale's building was not locked, which was either luck or concerning. He went in. The back door of the brownstone had a simple deadbolt that took him 40 seconds, which was longer than it should have and shorter than most people could have managed without tools. And he came into a kitchen that smelled like old coffee and the particular mustiness of a house where a single person had lived for decades. The light above the stove was on. That was the first thing. A light on at 6:30 meant someone was awake or someone had left it on. He moved through the kitchen into a short hallway. There was a noise from upstairs. Not alarming, the sound of someone moving around in a room, a chair scraping. He went up the stairs with his weight on the outside edges of the treads. Thomas Hale was in his home office, which occupied what had probably been the master bedroom before the room's original function became less important than the floor-to-ceiling shelves of legal documents and the massive partner's desk, and the 2 computers, and the wall of framed photographs that spoke to a lifetime of involvement in other people's important moments. He was in his late 60s, gray-haired, the kind of lean that came from decades of forgetting to eat while he worked. He was at his desk with a glass of something amber and a phone in his hand and the expression of a man who had been sitting with a problem since before the sun came up. He registered Nathan's presence in the doorway, and to his credit, he did not shout or reach for anything. He looked at Nathan for a long moment with eyes that were tired and sharp simultaneously. "Isabella sent you," he said. "I sent myself. She doesn't know I'm here yet." Nathan came into the room enough to see all of it. "There are two people in a car across your street." Hale looked at his window, which had its curtains drawn. "I know. They arrived around midnight." He paused. "I've been deciding what to do about it. With whiskey at 6 in the morning. The whiskey is my third option. The first two didn't pan out." He set the glass down. "Isabella called yesterday. I wasn't available because I was in a meeting I should have been more careful about. A man contacted me 3 weeks ago claiming to represent a European foundation interested in funding clean energy legal frameworks. We met several times. Yesterday morning, I realized he'd been asking the wrong questions for the kind of person he claimed to be. Vantage asset, Nathan said. Almost certainly. Which means they know Isabella talked to me. Which means they know I have the documents." He looked at Nathan directly. "The originals are in my safe. They've been trying to get me to leave the building since midnight. They had someone call my cell claiming there was a gas leak on the block, and I should evacuate. I didn't evacuate." "Good call. My knees are too bad to run anyway." He said it without lightness, just factual. "Who are you?" "Someone who's trying to keep Isabella alive." "Are you any good at it?" Nathan considered the question. "I haven't lost her yet." Hale absorbed this. "The documents," he said. "They contain my correspondence with her father over 3 years. His own notes. Hand annotated, which is why the originals matter more than copies. He was meticulous. He documented everything, including conversations with several people who are now in positions of considerable power and who would prefer those conversations didn't exist. Names. 2 sitting members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a former deputy director of a defense acquisition office. 4 private individuals who currently hold significant positions in defense contracting." He paused. "And a general. Retired now but active in several private sector roles that would make his documented involvement extremely damaging." Nathan was quiet for a moment. That was not a list of minor players. That was a list of people with the kind of reach that made problems disappear. Problems and people. "Vantage isn't just a mercenary network," Nathan said. "It has patrons. It has architects," Hale said. "People who built it deliberately, over years, as a private instrument. The Sterling technology was always part of the plan. Wallace Sterling just didn't realize it until he was already inside the arrangement." Wallace. Isabella's father, named now, made concrete. Nathan thought about Isabella in the conference room, saying, "I think he was afraid of them," and the weight of that settled differently now, with faces and titles attached to the fear. "We need to move the originals," Nathan said. "Right now, before the team outside changes their approach." "I have a bag ready," Hale said, which told Nathan the man had been sitting up all night making exactly this decision. "I packed it 2 hours ago." "There's a back alley exit. Can you manage stairs?" "I just told you my knees were bad, not that I was dead." He stood up with some visible effort and picked up a bag from beside his desk, a battered leather satchel, the kind that lawyers of his generation carried because they'd been carrying them since before rolling luggage existed. "Lead the way." Getting Hale out of the building through the back alley took 6 minutes and required 1 stop on the stairs for the man's knees, which he bore with bad grace and no complaint, and then they were in the alley and moving, and the car out front was none the wiser. Nathan called a cab from 2 blocks over, while Hale stood on the sidewalk in the early morning light, looking like a man who had just walked out of his own home without knowing when he'd walk back in, which was exactly what he was. "You've done this before," Hale said, watching Nathan work. "Not this specifically. The part where you move quickly through uncomfortable circumstances without appearing to." Nathan glanced at him. "Navy." "Ah." Hale straightened his coat. "Isabella's going to have a lot of questions for me." "She is," Nathan agreed. "I'm not sure I have all the answers. I know what I know from Wallace's documents. There are gaps. He paused. There are gaps that Wallace may have taken with him. The cab arrived. Nathan got Hale in and sent him to an address that wasn't Isabella's undisclosed apartment and wasn't anywhere connected to Sterling Energy. A midtown hotel, deliberately anonymous, paid in cash, booked under a name that Webb had set up for exactly this kind of contingency. He called Webb on the way back to the main avenue, and Webb said he'd have someone at the hotel within the hour. Then he called Isabella. She arrived at the hotel at 9:15, and the reunion between her and Hale was brief and private and conducted in the small sitting area of his room while Nathan stood in the corridor. He could hear the voices, not the words, the register, and the register told him enough. Hale's voice was slow and deliberate, the voice of someone who had been carrying something and was setting it down. Isabella's voice moved in a way that voices moved when a person was receiving information that rearranged things. When she came out of the room, she looked different. Not broken. That wasn't the right word. More like something had settled, some suspended question that had been sitting unresolved in her since her father died had finally come down, and the landing was hard but also, in some sense, necessary. My father tried to protect me, she said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, Nathan said. He failed. He bought you time. That's not nothing. She looked at the corridor wall. The people Hale named. Do you understand what those names mean? I understand what they can do, Nathan said, which is why the documents need to be in multiple secure locations before Vantage figures out they're gone from Hale's safe. I can get them to my attorney's escrow service. Encrypted, multiple redundancies, with a disclosure trigger if any of us go unreachable for more than, do that. Today. He paused. And then we need to talk about Falk. She nodded. She'd been thinking about Falk too, he could tell. It was in the set of her jaw, the way she'd been running the sequence in her head the same way he had. He's going to make a move on the files, she said. He told whoever he was talking to he'd get them. He doesn't know they're already offline and air-gapped, which means he's going to try to access them in the next day or two. So we let him try. She looked at him. And when he tries? When he tries, we're in a position to follow the access attempt back to whoever is receiving it. Claire's team can trace the data packet if we structure it right. Bait file, embedded tracker, Falk moves it through whatever channel he's using, and we see where it goes and who touches it on the other end. You want to use my company's files as bait. Fake files. Same architecture, same metadata, wrong data inside. If Falk takes them and hands them to Vantage, they'll believe they have what they need for long enough for us to move. Move where? To wherever they're operating from. Claire's been tracking the financial trails. There's a facility, a physical location where the Vantage technical team is based. Eastern Seaboard, probably Virginia or Maryland based on the communications patterns. If we can confirm it before they realize the files are fake, we go in, she said. We go in. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not a field operation, Nathan. I'm a person who builds things. I know that, he said. You'd be the one who shuts it down when we get there. I can get us in. But what they've done with your technology, the EMP applications, the weapon configuration, I can't undo that. You can. She looked at him. You don't actually know that I can. You built it. You understand it at a level that nobody else does. If they've modified it for weapons application, there's a reversion sequence or a shutdown architecture built into the original design. There is, she said slowly. My father and I built a termination protocol into the original battery management system. A backdoor, essentially. It was designed as a manufacturing quality control fail-safe, but it would also, yes, if they haven't removed it, and they wouldn't know to look for it because it's embedded in what looks like a routine diagnostic layer, it would shut down the discharge control system. How long would it take you to execute it? If I have direct access to the system, 20 minutes, maybe 30 if they've modified the interface layer. She paused. If they found the back door and patched it, I can't guarantee anything. Noted, Nathan said. Can you build the fake file tonight? Yes. Then let's move. The fake file took Isabella 4 hours to construct, working in Hale's hotel room on a laptop that had never been connected to Sterling Energy's network. She built it with the precision of someone who understood that the deception had to be complete. Not just superficially plausible, but convincingly detailed, the kind of detail that could only come from someone who knew what the real files contained. Nathan watched her work and thought about how it looked like other kinds of work he'd seen. The focused patience of someone diffusing something, the attention to what could kill you if you got it wrong. Claire embedded the tracker on her end. By 6 that evening, the bait file was in a partition on Sterling Energy's system where Falk's access credentials could reach it. They didn't have to wait long. Falk accessed the partition at 9:40 that night. The tracker activated. Claire had her team on it within seconds, and the destination address resolved. The data packet moved through 2 anonymizing layers and then landed on a server in an office complex in Manassas, Virginia. "I have an address," Claire said when she called Nathan. "It's a logistics company, shell entity, been operating for 4 years. The building has more power draw than any logistics company needs, which is consistent with high-energy experimental equipment." A pause. "There are 15 people on site based on communication traffic, armed, probably. Any sign they've identified the file as fake?" "Not yet. They'll probably run a technical validation pass first, which will take several hours, maybe overnight. You have a window." Nathan looked at Isabella across the hotel room. She was looking back at him. They had a window and windows closed. "I need a vehicle and 2 sets of credentials for a logistics facility visit," he said to Claire. "And I need to know if you have any assets near Manassas." "I have one," Claire said. "Former Marine, reliable. She doesn't like being called an asset. Her name is Reyes. Can she get us into the building?" "She can get you to the building. After that, it's on you." A pause. "Nathan, 15 people. I know. You're bringing a civilian. The civilian is the whole point." He paused. "Get me Reyes's number." He put the phone down and looked at Isabella. She had the leather satchel from Hale's place on the table in front of her. She'd taken custody of the documents, which were now distributed across 3 encrypted services and a physical copy in a law office safe in Philadelphia, a redundancy she'd arranged with a speed that suggested she'd been thinking about this longer than today. "You heard that," he said. 15 people, she said. "Probably not all of them are positioned in one place. Facilities like this run in shifts, have support staff. Not all of them will be armed and tactical." He paused. "Some of them will be. And you and I and a woman named Reyes. And you and I and a woman named Reyes." She looked at her hands on the table. "My father used to say that the only way to make a dangerous thing safe was to understand it completely. He meant the technology. I think he also meant the people who wanted it." She looked up. "I understand this technology completely." "I know," Nathan said. "Then let's go." Quiet. Reyes was a compact woman in her late 30s with a practical haircut and the manner of someone who had decided long ago to skip the parts of any conversation that weren't necessary. She met them in a gas station parking lot outside Manassas at 12:40 in the morning with a vehicle that was clean and a set of credentials that would pass a cursory guard check and a look on her face that said she'd done this before and found the briefing more interesting than the waiting. "You're the Navy guy," she said to Nathan. "Former." "Yeah." She glanced at Isabella. "And you're the reason we're doing this." "Yes," Isabella said. Reyes appeared to consider this. "Okay," she said, and that was sufficient. The facility was a converted industrial building in an office park that was otherwise occupied by unremarkable commercial tenants, the kind of park that existed everywhere on the outskirts of Northern Virginia, generic enough to disappear into the landscape. The exterior showed nothing unusual, which was the point. The additional power infrastructure was concealed in a new utility annex on the building's east side that could be logged as HVAC, upgrades on the county permit record. Reyes had the exterior camera positions from a drone pass she'd done that afternoon, and she walked them through the rotation and the gaps with the efficient brevity of someone presenting information, not asking for approval. There was a gap on the north side, a 40-second window between camera sweeps, and a maintenance access panel in the foundation that had been installed for the HVAC cover story and that Reyes had the override code for, courtesy of a source she didn't elaborate on. They went in at 1:15 in the morning. The interior was not what Nathan had expected, which was a lesson he should have stopped needing to learn by now. Never let the exterior tell you what the inside looks like. The building's original industrial open floor plan had been reconfigured into a functional research and operations space. There were workstations along one wall, servers along another, and at the far end of the main floor behind a transparent barrier, the experimental system. Nathan had seen photographs of Isabella's battery architecture in its commercial form. Elegant, compact, the kind of engineering that looked intentional rather than improvised. What sat behind the barrier looked like the same technology had been taken apart and put back together by someone who understood the function but not the philosophy. It was larger, more aggressive, bristling with components that had been added rather than integrated. Cables ran across the floor like roots. Warning indicators showed on 3 different monitors. Isabella stopped walking when she saw it. She stood very still for a moment, and Nathan watched her face. And on her face was something that wasn't quite horror and wasn't quite grief. It was the specific expression of a person seeing something they built turned into something they never intended. And it was a hard thing to watch. "It works," she said very quietly. "Can you shut it down?" Nathan asked. "Give me a minute." There were 2 guards on the main floor, one near the entrance they'd come through, one near the barrier. Nathan had seen them on the floor plan Reyes had sketched, and had a sequence in his head for handling it that required Reyes to cover the entrance guard while he dealt with the barrier 1. He communicated this to Reyes in 4 words and a hand signal, and she did the thing she needed to do with the economy of someone who'd been doing it for long enough that it didn't require drama. Nathan came around the barrier guard's blind side, and they went down, and they were zip-tied and breathing and considerably unhappy about it, but not dead, which was the standard Nathan held himself to. Isabella was already at the primary terminal. "The interface layer is modified," she said. She was typing fast, not panicky fast, but deliberate, her hands finding the keyboard with the confidence of someone who knew the system at a level that didn't require thought. "They've added a control overlay, but the underlying architecture is still mine. The back door is here." Her fingers paused for a fraction of a second. Someone looked at it. They didn't recognize it for what it was, but they looked. "How long?" 15 minutes? Maybe 20. Somewhere in the building, something moved. Nathan heard it. A door, a corridor, footsteps with the weight and spacing of someone who was alert rather than wandering. He crossed to the doorway at the edge of the main floor and checked the corridor. One person coming from the east end. Security rotation, probably, the kind that happened on a schedule he hadn't had time to fully map. He stepped out and handled it in the corridor and came back. His shoulder objected with the familiar ache, which he acknowledged and set aside. 12 minutes, he said. "I know," she said. The next 4 minutes were quiet in the way that operational situations are quiet when they're going well. Not peaceful, but structured, each element in place, the tension of waiting without a reason yet to panic. Nathan covered the corridor and the entrance point and ran the math on how long before someone noticed 2 unconscious guards or a missing patrol, and the math said they had single-digit minutes. Then the east wall door opened and 3 people came through it, and the math changed. 2 were armed. One had a phone up and was talking fast in a language Nathan needed a moment to identify as Czech. The armed 2 saw the situation, guards down, a man in the doorway, and the decision process was short. Nathan moved toward them because moving toward armed people in a confined space was almost always better than moving away. A principle that was counterintuitive until it wasn't. And he took the first one's weapon arm at the wrist and put the man into the second one, and they went down in a heap that was undignified and effective. The third man, the one with the phone, ran. Nathan let him. Letting him run was a calculation. Chasing him meant leaving Isabella alone with an active system and 2 unconscious guards and whatever else was in the building. Letting him run meant the timeline compressed to 0. He was back at Isabella's station in 6 seconds. "I need 5 more minutes," she said without turning around. "We have 2, he said. She didn't answer. She typed. On the monitors around the barrier, the indicators changed. Readings shifted, numbers dropped. One display that had been showing an ascending charge curve began moving the other direction. She was navigating the system the way someone navigated a house they'd grown up in but hadn't visited in years. Mostly muscle memory, partly improvisation. Wholly confident in a way that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with knowing. The east door opened again. 2 more people, both armed, and Nathan knew the geometry. He was between them and Isabella, and the distance was wrong, and one of them was raising a weapon and had a clean angle. He moved to close the angle, and something hit him in the left side like a truck had changed lanes into him, and the world went briefly white. And then he was on the floor on one knee, and there was a very specific quality of pain that he recognized from the first 2 times he'd been shot, which was that it was enormous, and also, for a short window, not entirely real. He got back up. He didn't particularly decide to. His body just continued with what it had been doing, the same way it always had. Not because he was brave, or not only that, but because there was a woman 5 feet away who needed 20 more seconds, and the only thing standing between her and the people coming through the door was him, and that was the whole of it. He took the closer of the 2 people down. He did not manage the second before the second reached him, and there was a period of about 30 seconds that he experienced primarily as mechanical. Pure function, no thought, the part of the brain that had been trained for exactly this running on its own, while the part that was a father and a man who cleared tables and missed his wife was somewhere behind it, watching. He was on the floor again when it ended, sitting, not prone, which felt important, the wall at his back and his breathing wrong in a way that told him the bullet had done more than graze. He had one hand pressed to his left side. The 2 people who'd come through the door were both down. They were breathing. He thought they were breathing. He was fairly confident about one of them. "Nathan," Isabella's voice. Then her face. She'd left the terminal. She was crouching in front of him, and her expression had the sharp focus of someone who has just assessed a situation and arrived at a fact they don't like. "Is it done?" he said. "Yes, it's done." She had both hands on his, pressing over his. "The system is shut down. The discharge control is offline. They can't restart it without the core architecture that we've already pulled." Her voice was steady, and he appreciated that. He didn't want her to fall apart right now. "Marcus is coming. I sent Webb the location 20 minutes ago as a contingency. He's 8 minutes out." "Good contingency," Nathan managed. "Don't talk." "I'm fine." "You've been shot." "I know." He looked up at her. "Is the back door gone after execution?" "Yes, self-deleting protocol. They can't reverse engineer the shutdown sequence. And the data on their servers, I triggered a wipe when I executed the back door. Claire's people can come in and pull whatever survives, but the weapons configuration data is gone." She paused. "Nathan, stop talking about the technology. It's the important part. You're the important part right now." She said it with a directness that wasn't tender exactly, but had something under it, the quality of words that came out the right shape, because there wasn't time or energy to shape them wrong. He heard Rhea's voice from across the floor, then Webb's through a comms device somewhere. He heard motion, organized and purposeful, people who knew what they were doing arriving to do it. He sat against the wall and kept breathing, which was harder than it had been 20 minutes ago, and easier than it was going to be for the next few days. And he thought about Lily in Connecticut with Mrs. Okonkwo, probably asleep, one hand curled around his old watch. He thought about the watch's weight on her wrist, slightly too large, the wrong size link in the band. He thought about the boat with wheels. "Hey," Isabella said. She hadn't moved. "Yeah," he said. "You got up. After you got back up." He thought about how to answer that. He thought about what the real answer was, not the operational one. "Someone needed me to," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the kind of looking she'd done the night on the sidewalk. The cataloging kind. The kind that was building something from what it saw. Then Webb was there. And someone with a medic's bag was there. And the careful, painful business of what came next began. And the wall of the facility in Manassas was cold against his back, and the monitors across the room were showing flat lines where they'd been showing numbers. And somewhere above them the sky was doing whatever skies did in the small hours before dawn. He closed his eyes. He stayed conscious, which took more effort than it should have, but he managed. Some things you did because they needed doing. That had always been enough of a reason, and it still was. And he was still here. And the line between those 2 facts was the whole of what he had to offer. It was, for now, enough. The hospital in Manassas was not where Nathan would have chosen to spend the next 4 days, but his body didn't consult him about the preference. The bullet had done what bullets do when they find the space between a rib and the organs behind it. It caused damage that was serious without being immediately fatal. The kind of wound that surgeons fixed with competence and then handed back to you as a problem you'd spend the next several weeks managing. The surgical resident who closed him up was 29 years old and had the focused efficiency of someone still close enough to her training to treat every case like an exam, which Nathan found preferable to the alternative. She told him he'd been lucky. He told her he'd been moving, which was different from luck, and she gave him the look that medical professionals give patients who say things like that, which was the look of someone who had decided not to argue with a person who'd just come out of anesthesia. Webb was in the corridor when they brought Nathan out of recovery. Not pacing, standing, with the particular stillness of someone who'd been trained out of pacing and hadn't fully decided what to replace it with. He gave Nathan a brief nod that communicated several things. "You're alive, the situation is contained, I'll brief you when you're capable of receiving a briefing." Nathan was capable within 2 hours, which was faster than Webb expected and slower than Nathan wanted. The Manassas facility had been secured by a joint federal and private intelligence team that Claire had coordinated from D.C. in the hours following Nathan and Isabella's exit. 3 of Vantage's people had been taken into custody at the site. 4 others had been picked up at the Midtown Hotel where the extraction team had been staged. The surveillance unit watching Sterling Energy's building had been rolled up by 9 in the morning. 2 people, neither of whom had said much yet, but the physical evidence was extensive. David Falk had been removed from Sterling Energy's offices at 7:15 that morning by 2 federal agents, which was the kind of removal that generated attention among the remaining staff, and which Isabella had apparently handled by calling a company-wide meeting and being direct about what had happened in the way that she tended to be direct about things. Nathan found out about this from Webb, who told him with the slight air of someone who had expected their employer to be more circumspect and had adjusted his expectations. Thomas Hale was cooperating fully with the federal investigation. The documents he'd kept, Wallace Sterling's annotated records, the correspondence, the decades of careful notation from a man who'd understood, too late and then too well, what he'd been part of, were now in official hands, with copies in 4 separate jurisdictions because Hale had done his job before anyone asked him to. The 2 senators, the former defense official, the general, the private contractors, all of them were facing the kind of mourning that people with that much to lose face when the documentation is thorough, and the documentation was, in this case, meticulous. Nathan lay in the hospital bed and listened to all of this and felt the particular flatness that came after operations. The decompression of sustained tension, the body and mind going through their respective accounting processes, tallying what had been spent and what remained. He'd felt it before. It never got more comfortable. It was just the thing that happened when the doing was done and the living with it began. Isabella came on the second day. She arrived in the late afternoon after visiting hours, which meant she'd arranged something with the administration, which didn't surprise him. She came in with 2 cups of coffee from somewhere that wasn't the hospital cafeteria, which he appreciated with the disproportionate gratitude of someone who'd been subsisting on institutional food for 36 hours. She sat in the chair beside his bed, and for a moment neither of them said anything, which was a different kind of silence than the operational silences they'd shared. Looser, less purposeful, the silence of 2 people who had been through something and were finding out what they were on the other side of it. "Falk is cooperating," she said. "I heard. He had debt. Serious personal debt, and not the company. Personal. Paul, his brother-in-law, connected him to someone in the Vantage structure who offered to clear it in exchange for access. He told himself it was only operational data, that nobody would get hurt." She looked at her coffee cup. "He said that. In the interview. That he told himself nobody would get hurt." "People say that," Nathan said. "Does it make it more understandable?" "Understandable, yes. Forgivable is a different question and not one I answer for other people." She looked at him. "You're a very particular kind of person, Nathan Archer." "What kind is that?" "The kind that says exactly what they mean without making it comfortable." She paused. "I find it difficult, and also, I find it necessary. I've spent too much of my professional life around people who say what they mean after they've wrapped it in 3 layers of what they think you want to hear. Occupational hazard of being someone people need things from. Is that what you think of me? Someone people need things from?" He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he thought about things. "I think you've built something that matters," he said. "And I think the version of you that people see, the company, the narrative, the press photographs, I think you've used that version to protect the part of you that actually built it. The part that stays up all night to air-gap a server. He paused. That's not a criticism. She was quiet for a moment. My father did that too, compartmentalized, kept the work separate from the person. She looked at the window, which showed a strip of gray Virginia sky. I used to think he did it to protect the company. I understand now he did it to protect me, from what he knew, from the people he'd gotten involved with. He thought that if he separated me from it completely, kept me focused on the science and the future, they'd never have a reason to come near me. A pause. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about that, Nathan said, but he was right about you, the science, the future. That part he got right. She turned back from the window. There was something in her expression that was complicated and real and not assembled for anyone's benefit, and he found it, the way he found most unguarded things, more trustworthy than its composed alternative. The EMP configuration is gone, she said. The data wipe covered the weaponized modification entirely. Claire's technical team went through the servers and confirmed. They have fragments, but nothing operable. Nothing that could be reconstructed without access to the original architecture, which they don't have. A pause. My technology is intact. The core battery architecture is still whole. 15 years of work, and it's still what it was supposed to be. What happens to it now? That's what I've been thinking about. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. I've had conversations with 3 government agencies in the last 48 hours. All of them want exclusive access of one form or another. I've said no to all of them. She paused. I'm going to pursue an international oversight structure instead, a multilateral scientific board with transparent access and open source publication of the non-sensitive elements. Making it belong to everyone is the only way to ensure it belongs to no one exclusively. Exclusively is what made it a target. Nathan thought about Wallace Sterling, who'd tried to put his technology somewhere it couldn't be weaponized, and his daughter, who'd figured out a better version of the same instinct. The father had hidden it. The daughter was going to share it in a way that made hiding it impossible. Different methods, same understanding of the problem. Your father would have gotten there eventually, Nathan said. I know, she said. I think that's what he was working toward. He just ran out of time. She looked at him directly. You didn't. He didn't answer that right away. He thought about running out of time, about the wall in Manassas, the specific quality of pain, and the specific decision to get back up, which hadn't felt like courage from the inside and probably didn't from the outside either, but which had been the only available choice given the circumstances and given what was on the other side of it. I had reasons, he said. She seemed to understand what the word reasons contained. She didn't push it, which he appreciated. They sat together in the late afternoon light of the hospital room and finished their coffee, and it wasn't comfortable exactly. There was too much between them that was still settling, too much reality that hadn't fully organized itself into the shape it would eventually take. But it was honest, and honest was better than comfortable by a margin Nathan had long since stopped debating. Lily arrived on the 3rd day. Mrs. Okonkwo drove her from Connecticut herself, which Nathan had not asked her to do and which she had apparently decided was simply what was going to happen, and Nathan heard them coming down the corridor before he saw them because Lily was talking. Something about a dog at the Connecticut house, a large brown dog named something that Nathan couldn't catch from the room. And then she appeared in the doorway and stopped talking mid-sentence. She looked at him in the hospital bed with the particular expression of a child assessing damage, not melodramatic about it, just thorough, taking inventory with her eyes in the way she sometimes did that reminded him uncomfortably of himself. She looked at the IV, the monitoring equipment, the bandaging visible above the hospital gown's neckline. She looked at his face. You said careful, she said. I was careful. You have tubes. The tubes are temporary. She came into the room slowly, which was not her usual mode of entering spaces, and she set her backpack down beside the chair and stood next to the bed and continued looking at him. He could see her working through something, the gap between what she'd been told, which was that her father had been hurt but was okay, and what she was now seeing, which was her father in a hospital bed with tubes, which required its own processing regardless of the reassurances. Does it hurt? She asked. Some. More than some. More than some, he admitted. Less than it did yesterday. She considered this. Then, with the logic of an 8-year-old navigating an adult situation, "Can I sit next to you?" "Yeah." She climbed up onto the bed beside him, on his right side, away from the monitoring equipment, and sat with her back against the headboard and her legs extended, her shoulder touching his arm. She didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't either. Mrs. Okonkwo, visible in the doorway, gave Nathan a look that communicated that she was going to find the cafeteria and give them time. And Nathan mouthed, "Thank you," and she made a dismissive gesture that meant obviously and was gone. "The dog's name was Biscuit," Lily said. "Big dog?" "Enormous. He slept on my feet." A pause. Mrs. Okonkwo said he was undisciplined. He was pretty undisciplined, but he was nice. Nathan looked at the ceiling. "I'm sorry you had to go somewhere else." "It was okay." She said it in the way she said things that were okay but had a more complicated layer underneath. "I knew you were doing something important." "How did you know that?" "Because you always are, even when you pretend you're just clearing plates." She looked up at him. "I'm not a baby, Dad. I know what you used to do." He was quiet. He thought about what to say, whether to explain or deflect or simply acknowledge. He was tired physically, in the specific way of post-surgery days, and tired people sometimes told the truth more efficiently than rested ones. "I know you're not," he said. "I've been trying to figure out how much of the true version of things to give you. You're 8. Almost 9. Almost 9, he allowed. "I didn't want you to grow up thinking the world was dangerous all the time." "It is dangerous," Lily said, with a matter-of-factness that landed like something much heavier. "But you're here." "So?" She looked at his hand on the blanket and put her hand next to it, not holding it, just adjacent, the way she sometimes did. This child who had learned to be near him without demanding anything from him, who'd learned that proximity was its own form of enough. He turned his hand over, and she put hers in it, and that was the whole of it for a while. "Is it over?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "It's over." "Promise?" He thought about promises. He thought about what he could honestly promise and what he couldn't. About the nature of the life he'd lived and the world it had moved through, and the fact that over was always a relative term, that there was always another situation, another sequence of events that could arrive without announcement. He thought about all the reasons he had to hedge. "The specific thing that was dangerous," he said. "That's over, I promise." She appeared to accept the precision of this. She leaned her head against his arm and looked at the window, and after a while her breathing settled into the slow rhythm of someone half asleep, and Nathan lay there and felt the ache in his side and the weight of his daughter's head, and something else that was harder to name, a loosening maybe, of something that had been held tight for a very long time. Well, he was discharged on the 4th morning. Webb picked him up, which felt odd in the way that most things in his new configuration felt odd. The casual presence of people and resources that hadn't existed in his life 4 weeks ago. The structural change that had happened so fast he hadn't had time to adjust to each stage before the next one arrived. The apartment in Crown Heights felt both familiar and strange. Lily went straight to her room to retrieve specific possessions she'd been unable to bring to Connecticut and seemed deeply concerned about. Nathan sat at the kitchen table with the slow movements of someone managing pain carefully, and looked at the kitchen and looked at the word puzzle still sitting on the table with its 3 blank answers, and thought about the shape of things. He called Claire that afternoon. "The federal case is moving," she said without preamble. "The 2 senators are already negotiating. The general is less cooperative, but the documentation is extensive enough that cooperation isn't required." A pause. "The Vantage network isn't finished. Networks like this don't finish, they reconstitute. But the specific leadership structure is compromised and the technology they were building toward is neutralized. That's a meaningful outcome." Falk? "Cooperating fully. His attorney is making a case for reduced exposure. He'll probably get it." A pause. "Nathan, the work you did on this," Claire said it the way she said most things, with a specific economy that left you to draw your own conclusions about what the words meant. "If you wanted to come back formally—" "I don't," he said. "I know, but it's on the table." "It's not on my table." He paused. "Claire, there's something I want to talk to you about. A different structure." He laid out what he'd been thinking about in the hospital, in the hours when sleep was difficult and the mind went to the places it went. Not a return to the work he'd done before. That work had been defined by its context, a specific machinery of national security that he'd served with full commitment and left with full intention. What he was thinking about was something else, something that addressed the specific problem Isabella's situation had shown him. The gap between what technology could do and what the people responsible for it understood about how it could be used against them. The gap was where people like Vantage lived. And the gap existed, in part, because the people building the most significant technologies were building them inside their expertise and outside everything else. They understood their science completely and the threat environment around it barely at all. A protection and advisory operation, Claire said slowly, for high-risk technology assets. Not just protection, assessment, working with the developers directly to understand the threat vectors specific to what they're building. You can't separate the security problem from the technical one. Vantage didn't try to break through Isabella's security. They built a path through the people inside it. That's a different problem, and it requires people who understand both sides. A long pause. And Isabella Sterling is the first client, if she wants to be. Have you talked to her about this? Not yet. He paused. I wanted to know if you thought it was viable first. I think, Claire said carefully, that you've identified something real. The private sector is full of people building things that are going to matter enormously and who have no framework for what that means in terms of who will want to own or destroy what they're building. Formal intelligence structures aren't positioned to help them. Too much bureaucracy. Too many competing priorities. A pause. And you're positioned unusually well. I know the work, Nathan said. I also know what it costs when it goes wrong. Both of those things matter. They do? A pause. I can help with the structural setup, quietly, and I can point you toward 3 other situations where what you're describing is exactly what's needed. He looked at the word puzzle on the table. 3 blank answers. He picked up Lily's pencil. Give me a month to get back on my feet, he said. Take 6 weeks, Claire said. Your rib needs time. 5 weeks. You're impossible. I've been told. He ended the call. He sat at the table and looked at the puzzle and filled in one of the blank answers, which was a 7-letter word meaning to persist, and he got it right on the first try. He talked to Isabella a week after he got home, in person, at a coffee place not far from Sterling Energy that was not the Crown Heights coffee shop, but had the same quality of afternoon light at the same time of day, which he noticed and found mildly absurd to notice. She looked better than she had in the hospital. Not healed exactly. Healing took longer than 2 weeks, and she had the residual sharpness of someone still processing, still integrating what had happened into the working story of her life. But she was forward-facing in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. The difference between a person moving toward something and a person moving away from something they couldn't stop thinking about. He told her about the idea. She listened the way she listened, completely, without interrupting, building her understanding from the structure outward. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment in the way that her quiet meant she was deciding something rather than waiting to speak. You'd be working with people like me, she said. Builders, scientists, people who understand their work completely and the context around it not at all. Mostly. And you'd need to understand their work well enough to assess the specific threat. Enough. Not completely. That's their part, but enough to ask the right questions. She looked at her coffee. My father would have benefited from someone asking the right questions 20 years ago. She said it without bitterness, just factually. He was brilliant and naive, and the combination nearly destroyed everything he built. She looked up. Not naive the way people use it as an insult. Naive the way you get when you've spent decades inside a problem, and the problem is all you can see. That's the gap, Nathan said. That's the gap, she agreed. She looked at him for a moment. I want to be your first official engagement, not because I'm in immediate danger. The situation is contained. I have security infrastructure that's actually functional now. But because what you're describing is relevant to the next stage of what I'm building. The International Oversight Board, the open source framework, the multilateral structure, that's not going to stay clean on its own. There are going to be people who want to compromise it, redirect it, quietly capture it. She paused. I want someone asking the right questions from inside. That would mean working together regularly. I'm aware of what it would mean. He looked at her. She held his gaze with the steadiness that was characteristic of her. Not aggressive, not defensive, just present and clear about what she was saying. He thought about the sidewalk on Delancey Street, the first 3 seconds of seeing her, the fraction of a moment before everything became operational. He thought about the coffee shop in Crown Heights, and the hospital room, and the conference room at midnight, and the corridor in Manassas. He thought about the accumulation of it, all those hours in each other's company under pressure, which was its own kind of knowledge, the kind that told you what a person was made of in the places where it mattered. He didn't know what any of it was yet, in terms of its longer shape. He thought she probably didn't either, and he thought that was honest, and honest was the standard he held things to. Okay, he said. A pause. That's it? Okay. What else should there be? She almost smiled. The shape of it was familiar to him now. The almost smile that preceded the real one, the version she allowed first before the unguarded version followed. Most people would make a longer speech. Most people have more to prove. The real smile arrived. It changed her face in the way that real smiles did. Less organized, more true. The weeks that followed had the quality of reconstruction. The slow daily business of putting things back in order after disruption, which was less dramatic than the disruption itself and more demanding in its way because it required sustained attention rather than acute response. Nathan's side healed by degrees. He did the exercises the physical therapist gave him without enjoying them and without skipping them, the same approach he brought to most necessary things. He slept in increments and then in longer stretches, and then, by the end of the 3rd week, in something approaching the continuous way he'd slept before the incident on Delancey, before Lily's gray car, before all of it. He did not go back to Carnivale. He called Gerald and had a brief and slightly awkward conversation in which he explained that he was leaving, and Gerald said he hoped everything was okay, and Nathan said it was, and there was a pause during which it was evident that Gerald understood something had happened, and also understood he was not going to find out what. And then they said goodbye. And that was the end of a chapter that Nathan noted the closing of without ceremony. He picked Lily up from school every day that his mobility allowed. She had stopped mentioning the gray car, not because she'd forgotten it, but because she'd apparently placed it in the same internal category where she placed other things that had been resolved. The category of things that had been real and were now past, which she managed with a practical tidiness that he sometimes envied and mostly admired. She was painting again. She'd gone through a period of pencil drawings exclusively and had apparently decided that paint was the appropriate medium for whatever she was currently trying to express, and the kitchen table had developed a faint blue and yellow stain along one edge that Nathan had made no serious effort to remove. Her current project was a large painting on cardstock of what appeared to be a city. Not a real city, an invented one, buildings of different sizes and colors in no particular architectural style. The kind of city that existed only in the imagination of an 8-year-old who was painting what a city should look like rather than what cities actually looked like. What city is it? Nathan asked one evening, sitting across the table from her while she worked. Ours, she said, without looking up. We don't have a city. Not yet. He looked at the painting. It had a harbor on one side with, he looked more carefully, what appeared to be a boat with wheels at the water's edge. The boat, he said. It belongs in the painting, she said, because that's how you get there, land or water. He looked at her painting and at her bent head and at the blue stain on the table and thought about the word ours, the specific weight of it, the reach of it, what it contained. He didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to a thing was just to let it be the thing it was. 3 months after Manassas, the oversight board that Isabella had proposed held its first formal meeting in Geneva. 14 countries, 31 scientists, 8 independent monitors with full transparency access to the core research protocols. Nathan was there, not as a delegate, not in any official capacity that appeared in the meeting record, but present, watching the room in the way he watched rooms, the way he apparently could not stop watching rooms and had decided to stop fighting. He stood near the back and watched 14 countries argue about governance structures and intellectual property frameworks and research disclosure timelines, and thought about the fact that this meeting existed because of a series of events that had started on a sidewalk in lower Manhattan on a Friday night with a water carafe and 8 seconds and a decision he hadn't made so much as discovered he'd already made. Isabella was at the front of the room. She was speaking in the clear, precise way she spoke when she was in front of people who needed to understand something. Not performing, not managing impressions, just explaining a thing she understood completely to people she needed to understand it too. She had the quality, in those moments, of someone who had fully located themselves inside their own purpose, which was rarer than it should have been and more valuable than people usually recognized. She caught his eye from the front of the room, briefly, during a pause in the discussion. Not a signal, not a message, just a moment of mutual awareness, the kind that accumulated over time and didn't need to be named to mean something. He looked away. He went back to watching the room. Later, after the session, they walked along the lake in the early evening, the way people walked in Geneva when they needed somewhere to put their thoughts. The water was very still and the Alps were visible at the horizon in the particular blue-gray of late afternoon, and it was cold enough that Isabella had her hands in her coat pockets, which was the same posture she'd had outside his apartment building in Crown Heights 3 months ago when this had started. "It worked," she said. "The meeting worked," Nathan said. "The structure is still theoretical. You never give anything the full credit." "I give things credit when they've demonstrated they can hold weight." She looked at the water. "My father never saw anything like this," she said. "A room where the technology is treated as a shared problem rather than a competitive asset." A pause. "I used to think he'd built something that created the danger. I understand now he built something that revealed who the dangerous people were. The danger was always there. He just made it visible." Nathan looked at the water too. He thought about revealed danger, about the particular mercy of knowing where the threat was rather than moving through a world that contained it invisibly. He thought about the gap again, the one he'd identified, the one that Vantage had lived in. That gap was going to exist in every significant technology that was built from here forward. Someone was going to be needed to stand in it. He was beginning to understand that standing in gaps was, in the end, what he had always done, not heroically. He had no patience for the heroic framing of it, simply practically. There was a space where harm could enter, and he understood the space, and he stood in it. That was the whole of the description. It wasn't a comfortable life. It wasn't the anonymous life he'd tried to build after Sarah. It wasn't what he'd imagined in the foggy period after the Navy, after the grief, when he'd thought about what a quiet future might look like. A clear schedule, a child in school, plates cleared without consequence. But it was his. The full version of it, not the reduced version. The version that included the kitchen table and the word puzzles and Lily's paint stains, and also this, standing by a lake in Geneva watching the people he worked alongside do work that mattered, carrying what he knew how to carry, being what he'd apparently always been regardless of the job title. "What are you thinking?" Isabella asked. He thought about how to answer that honestly. "That my daughter is going to run out of cardstock," he said. "She's been painting every day. I should have bought more." A pause, and then she laughed. The full version, unguarded, the one that changed her face. It carried across the water and came back diminished, the way sounds did over open water. And the Alps sat at the horizon doing what mountains did, and Nathan stood by the lake in the cold with someone he trusted beside him, and thought about the boat with wheels, the invented city, the harbor at the painting's edge. Land or water, however you needed to go. He thought about Lily at home with Mrs. Okonkwo, painting her city that didn't exist yet, adding buildings and boats and streets that went wherever she decided they went, which was the particular freedom of the imagination, that it could build what reality hadn't gotten around to yet, that it could put a harbor next to a city and a boat at the water's edge and call it ours without needing anyone's permission. He thought about what his daughter knew that he was still learning. The world was dangerous, but you were here. So you built the boat, you painted the city, you stood in the gap when the gap needed standing in, and you came home, and you bought more cardstock, and you sat across the table from the person who was making something out of nothing, and you let it be true that you were part of what ours meant. That was the victory. Not the room in Manassas, not the Geneva meeting, not the 14 countries and the 31 scientists. Those things mattered, and they were real. and Nathan would work to protect them for as long as the work needed doing. But the victory was the table with the paint stain, the puzzle with the filled-in answers, the watch slightly too large on a small wrist. The greatest battles Nathan Archer had ever fought were not the ones that left scars. They were the ones that taught him, slowly and with considerable resistance, that the point of surviving was not to survive. It was to actually live in the thing you'd protected, to stay present in it, to let it matter the way it was trying to matter. He was still learning that. He thought he'd probably be learning it for a long time. He was, for the first time in years, willing to take the time. The lake held the last of the light. The Alps held the sky. And Nathan Archer, who had spent 15 years learning to disappear and 3 years trying to stay disappeared and several weeks discovering that some things didn't let you disappear, no matter how practiced you were at it, stood by the water in Geneva and let himself be exactly where he was. Present. Accountable. Whole in the incomplete, imperfect, ongoing way of a person who was still in the middle of the story and had decided, finally, that the middle was not a problem to solve, but a place to be. That was enough. That was, it turned out, everything.